Sanctuary was the last human colony left. Once, humanity had stretched across dozens of star systems, building an empire of trade, exploration, and hope. But that was before the Vorax came. Ruthless and unrelenting, they tore through human space, destroying everything in their path. Planet after planet fell, fleets were crushed, and billions were lost. Sanctuary, nestled in a quiet corner of the galaxy, had become the final refuge for the scattered remnants of humanity. It wasn't much a frontier world with more farmers than soldiers, but it was all they had left. Commander Sarah Hayes stood on the wall overlooking the city, her battle-worn armor still gleaming in the early morning light. She watched as the last of the survivors, civilians from other fallen colonies, streamed into the city gates. Thousands of faces, children, elders, the wounded, all hoping for protection behind the reinforced walls of Sanctuary. "How long do we have?" she asked, turning to Major Davis, her second in command. 2 days, maybe less," he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The Vorax fleet is massive. They'll wipe us out in a single pass if they break through our defenses." Hayes clenched her fists. "We won't let them." Sanctuary had once been a thriving agricultural world, but over the last few months, it had been transformed into a fortress. Automated turrets lined the city walls, every available soldier armed and stationed. But they all knew the truth. This was their last stand. No reinforcements were coming. There was no backup fleet hiding somewhere in the stars. "Commander," Davis said softly, "we've run the numbers. Even if every man, woman, and child here fought to the death, we couldn't stop them. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. We should consider evacuating." Hayes shook her head. "Evacuate to where? There's no other place left. If we fall, humanity falls." Davis didn't argue. He had known Hayes long enough to understand her resolve. She wasn't the kind of leader who surrendered, not when there was still a glimmer of hope. And that was why, despite the odds, the people of Sanctuary still believed they had a chance. As night fell, Hayes gathered her command team in the war room. A holographic display of the Vorax fleet hovered above the table, red dots swarming like a plague of locusts. The air was tense as engineers, strategists, and soldiers huddled together. "Any good news?" Hayes asked, breaking the silence. Lieutenant Kwon, the lead engineer, shook her head. "The outer satellites are already picking up their advance. We've activated every defense we have, but it won't be enough." "We can't just sit and wait for them to steamroll us," Major Davis added. "We need to find a way to disrupt their approach." "We could target their command ships," Kwon suggested. "They rely heavily on central coordination. If we could take out the flagship, it might cause enough chaos to delay their attack." Hayes nodded slowly. "We could send a strike team, but it would be a suicide mission." Silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what that meant. "I'll go," Hayes said after a long pause. Davis immediately stood. "You're the commander. You can't." "I'm the commander, which means I make the decisions," Hayes interrupted. "And I'm not going to sit behind these walls while our people die. We need someone with combat experience out there. I'll lead the strike team." Kwon spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll go with you. I've been working on a prototype EMP device. If we can get close enough to their flagship, we might be able to disable their systems temporarily." Hayes looked at her, then at the others. "Anyone else?" Several hands rose. Soldiers, engineers, volunteers. They were willing to follow her to the end. "All right," Hayes said, her voice steady. "We'll go at dawn." The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, a small team of ships launched from Sanctuary. The Vorax fleet loomed in the distance, a dark, ominous wall of death. Inside the cramped cockpit of her fighter, Hayes felt the weight of the mission pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring the future of her people. "Stay in formation," she ordered over the comms. "We need to slip through their perimeter undetected." Kwon's voice crackled through. "The EMP device is ready. We'll only have one shot at this." The Vorax ships began to appear on their scanners, massive dreadnoughts and sleek attack cruisers, their black hulls absorbing the light from the distant stars. The strike team moved silently, using the asteroid field around Sanctuary as cover. They weaved between rocks, avoiding patrols, inching closer to the Vorax flagship. "Almost there," Hayes whispered, her heart pounding. She knew they had maybe minutes before the Vorax detected them. Suddenly, alarms blared in her cockpit. "Damn it, we've been spotted!" "Go, go, go!" The team broke formation, scattering as Vorax fighters descended on them. The skies erupted into chaos, lasers streaking across the darkness. Hayes pushed her fighter to its limits, dodging incoming fire as she headed straight for the flagship. "Quan, now!" Quan activated the EMP, sending a pulse of energy toward the Vorax flagship. For a moment, everything went dark. The massive ship flickered, its lights and engines sputtering. The Vorax fighters around them faltered, their coordination breaking. "Direct hit," Quan shouted. But the victory was short-lived. As the flagship recovered, a Vorax dreadnought fired a blast that tore through Quan's ship, turning it into a ball of fire. Hayes screamed, her eyes filling with tears, but there was no time to mourn. "Fall back," she ordered, her voice raw. The surviving ships peeled away, racing back toward Sanctuary. Behind them, the Vorax fleet reorganized, but the damage had been done. The flagship systems were crippled, and their advance slowed. Back at Sanctuary, the news of the strike team's partial success spread quickly. Hayes returned to the city, greeted by cheers from the civilians and soldiers alike. But as she dismounted her fighter, her face was grim. Quan and half the team hadn't made it. "Was it enough?" Davis asked, meeting her at the gates. Hayes looked up at the sky. The Vorax fleet was still coming, but they had bought themselves time. "I don't know," she said quietly. 2 hours later, the Vorax arrived. The ground shook as their dreadnoughts descended, launching waves of troops toward Sanctuary's walls. The final battle had begun. The people of Sanctuary fought with everything they had. Farmers picked up rifles. Children carried supplies, medics worked frantically as soldiers fell. It was chaos, blood, and fire. The Vorax, relentless and merciless, tore through the defenses, inch by inch. But humanity didn't back down. Hayes led the charge, her sword raised high, rallying the defenders. "For Sanctuary!" she screamed, her voice carrying above the roar of battle. The fighting lasted hours, but in the end, the walls of Sanctuary were breached. Hayes stood at the city center, her armor cracked and her face bloodied, surrounded by the last remnants of her people. The Vorax leader approached, towering over her, his cold eyes gleaming with victory. "It is over, human," he hissed. "Your species is finished." Hayes looked up at him, defiance burning in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice steady. "As long as one of us stands, humanity survives." The Vorax leader raised his blade, but before he could strike, the sky lit up. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield as ships descended from the clouds, human ships, battle-worn but defiant. Reinforcements had arrived. The Vorax, caught off guard, fell back as the new fleet rained fire down upon them. In the chaos, Hayes smiled through her exhaustion. They'd held long enough. Sanctuary and humanity had survived. Weeks later, as the rebuilding of Sanctuary began, Hayes stood once more on the wall, looking out over the horizon. The war wasn't over, but they had won a battle they weren't supposed to survive. Humanity had proven once again that even in the darkest moments, they could stand together and fight back. And as long as they had that, there was hope. Humanity, always fighting, always surviving. HFY